Say a prayer, I'm right. Okay. I want to tell you something, you who are relatively good Bible students, that's why you're here. I want to tell you that in this course, I will teach you nothing new, but I will restructure everything you know so that nothing will look the same when this course is over. I'm not going to teach you any facts you don't already know. But I guarantee by the time this course is over, everything will be so restructured that you will have a totally new view of everything. Okay, would somebody read extremely loudly Exodus chapter 20, beginning with verse 9?
Exodus or Ezekiel?
Ezekiel.
20.
Ezekiel 20, verse 9. Not loud enough.
But I acted for my name's sake. Go ahead.
That it should not be profaned before the Gentiles, among whom they were, in whose sight I had made myself known to them, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Therefore I made them go out of the land of Egypt, and brought them into the wilderness. And I gave them my statutes, and showed them my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. Yet the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes. They despised my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. And they greatly defiled my Sabbaths. Then I said I would pour out my fury on them in the wilderness, to consume them. But I acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profaned before the Gentiles, in whose sight I had brought them out. So I also raised my hand in an oath to them in the wilderness, that I would not bring them into the land which I had given them, flowing with milk and honey, the glory of all lands, because they despised my judgments and did not walk in my statutes, but profaned my Sabbaths, for their heart went after their idols. Nevertheless, my eyes spared them from destruction. I did not make an end of them in the wilderness. But I said to their children in the wilderness, do not walk in the statutes of your fathers, nor observe their judgments, nor defile yourselves with their idols. I am the Lord your God. Walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, and do them. Hallow my Sabbaths, and they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God.
Okay. The children of Israel wanted to be like the foreigners. And they said, we will follow the foreign ways. And God said, I will not make an end to you. I will send you into captivity. He did this with Israel, the 10 northern tribes under Ephraim. He said, if you want to be like the foreigners, I'll bring in a foreign army. They will mash you under their foot. They will take you out. They will move you to another country. You will lose your culture. You will lose your language. You will lose your religion. And I will send you around the world, but I will still do what I'm going to do. And I will use a foreigner to teach you about me. But the center of that relationship that God judged them for was the laws, the statutes, and the ordinances. Whenever you find 3 of those, God is talking about 3 separate parts. Whenever you find one word, he is talking about the whole part. I want to ask you something, because I've explained this last week. On the top, you have what we call the moral law. On the bottom, you have the sacrificial law of Yeshua HaMashiach being crucified for the sins of the world. And in the middle, you have the 8 feasts that are the culture that let Israel know that they are God's people. Without these feasts, you do not know that you are a child of God. I want to ask you something. Which of these is more important? Is the moral law more important than the sacrificial law?
No.
No?
No.
No?
No.
Is the sacrificial law more important than the moral law?
Yeah, but how do you know? How do you know?
You know by saying no.
You need to know.
You know by saying no. And the third question, since you waffled on that one, I'm going to ask, is the eightfold feasts, the celebrations of God, is this less important than this?
No.
No. Is this less important than this? My question is, if this is not less important than this, and this is not less important than this, why have none of us ever heard about it? Why did I make it through master's level division in theology and they never taught me any of this stuff? How is it that you and I went to churches for years and years and years, and we had the joy of the Christmas Eve service, and we had the joy of the resurrection service? You know, everybody got up at sunrise, and why is it we had all that joy, and they never taught us the eightfold feasts of Israel? Has anybody ever wondered about that? Why is it we made it as far as we did? We learned all about the sacrificial law because all you have to do is be a Pentecostal and they'll tell you all under the blood, under the blood, under the blood. All you have to do is do something wrong and they'll tell you about morality. But the reason that the Jewish people are persecuted worldwide, not by nations or by churches, but by the father of lies, Satan himself, is because of this one. That is the reason that the Jewish people have the anti-Semitism that they do, because in their stubbornness, they will not give up the eightfold feasts of God. Okay? Which of the three is most important? How can part of God's law be more important than the other? Okay. I want to talk about two things first, very quickly. The first thing is Passover. Passover is such a simple term, but it covers such a complex phenomenon. When I was going through my Bible, I was overjoyed when I found in Psalms where it said, I have created north and south. Any of you who have taken geology or any science course in college have learned that there have been a dozen North Poles in the northern part of the world. And God made the North Pole and changed the North Pole when he passed over. We'll get to that. And God, I found a Bible passage that said, I am the Lord, I create summer and winter. That sounds simple enough, doesn't it? You know what summer and winter means? It means that the earth was tilted at 23 degrees, and so on one side of the earth you have summer, and on the other side of the earth you have summer over on the other side. And you have winter over here, and summer over here, and winter over here, and summer over here. And as you go around, you have winter and summer. You see, it is the Passovers of God that create winter and summer. It is the Passover of God that created north and south. Passover means two things. It means a shift in the axis and a shift in the orbit of the earth around the sun. Those two things happen in Passovers. When God passes over, the axis tilt and the orbit of the earth are shifted. And I want to share with you, are you really a Bible believer? Because everybody tells me, I'm a good Baptist, I'm a Bible believer. I'm a good Presbyterian, I'm a Bible believer. I am a Pentecostal, of course I believe the Bible. We're going to take a look at the Bible, and we will see if we believe some of the things. I don't believe I'm going to teach you that's anything new. I'm going to teach you something you learned in Sunday school, didn't make sense, so you moved on. Okay. If you will take a look at the material that I gave you, I don't look at one Passover. I look at 8 Passovers, and the Passovers go from the creation of man right up until the second coming of Jesus Christ. I look at Passovers. Now, I've defined for you what Passover is. It is a shifting of the orbit, and it is a shifting of the axis. And I believe there have been 8 of them in the range of mankind. There have been 8 of them in the existence of mankind. Okay? I've given you these. I'm going to go through these one at a time. So you can kind of follow along on here. The first Passover that you've never heard called a Passover was the Passover of Adam. Does anybody have the New International Version?
I do.
Are you looking at it? Will you read me Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2.
God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty.
Okay, that's far enough.
Oh, that was two.
Is there a footnote down in the bottom of the New International Version that you have?
Yes.
What does the footnote say?
Or possibly became.
Became. It's the difference between active was and passive became. So what this tends to imply to me is that the earth was created without form and void. It was created out of this, and it became a perfect creation. And then at a certain point in its perfection, it became without form and void. Which would indicate to me that at some point God acted upon it and it became, that was a Passover, and God was getting ready to create the earth, a place where mankind could live and could rule and could dwell very well. And so the Passover of Adam is where God created the earth, which had been created, and he created it, and it became the perfection of what he created. That's Adam's Passover. Number 2, Noah's Passover. Okay? God created men. Men filled the world. Things got big. Things took place. It says that the Passover of Noah took 150 days. For 150 days, the earth shook and trembled. If you look in Revelation, and we'll do that a little later, if you look in Revelation, it says that the Revelation restructuring of the earth is going to take 5 months. If you take the 150 days of Genesis, and you take 5 months of 30 days, they become the same thing. And so what you have in Genesis, God took at the time of Noah, he took and he shook the world for 150 days. In Revelation, for 5 months, which is 5 times 30 days, he will take and reshape the earth into the shape that it was. There was originally one landmass, and it had 4 corners. And you and I know this because people constantly speak of the 4 corners of the earth, don't they? I mean, haven't you heard 1,000 times since you were a kid, the four corners of the earth? Well, then you look at it and you say it's a globe, and there are no corners on a globe. There's nothing around stuff. Yeah, but at one time, the cultic memory of man remembers that there was one landmass with four corners. And God took and he separated, and we'll talk about that at a later time. And at that time, the earth had a perfect orbit because it was perfect. So the earth went around the sun in 360 days, and it was perfect. Then the 150 days of Passover at the time of Noah took and pulled this orbit and extended it a little bit in one direction so it became an ellipse. 365 days. 364 and a quarter. It extended itself. It says in Genesis chapter 1 that there was no rain on the earth before the time of Noah. No rain. And we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, and we have monsoons, and we have these great northers that blow in, and we have all kinds of storms and tornadoes and all these things going because something has changed with the weather pattern. And we'll take a look at that because that happened in the Passover of Noah. Okay, number 3. There was a Passover at the time of Abraham. Now, I searched through this material for 25 years before I saw that Abraham knew about the laws, the statutes, and the ordinances. I didn't know that. Nobody taught me that. And suddenly I'm reading along and saying, God, what are you saying? And most of these concepts of the laws, the statutes, and the ordinances just came because I like to read the Bible. And I'd read long sections, I kept bumping into the same stuff. Laws, statutes, ordinances, long statutes, ordinances. Law, statutes, ordinances. And I said, what is this all about? So I studied it in the Hebrew, and they say, well, that means the difference between something printed on the wall and something printed on a page in a book. Come on. I don't believe that. Not at all. It has to be a different meaning. So at the time of Abraham, there was a Passover. It happened at Sodom and Gomorrah because obviously God was dealing with the violence and corruption issue again. He was not happy with it. And the Passover of Abraham is what a type for the rapture, when God is going to send in his angels, grab two people by their hands, and say, come with me. We're getting out of here because God is ready to pass over, and he's going to start changing it, and he's going to move it back together. He's going to take the one landmass that's been pulled into 5 continents, and he's going to pull the 5 continents back into one landmass. He's going to make it perfect again. He's going to straighten it again. And by the way, he's going to leave some people there through it. So in their bomb shelters, and in their cement bunkers, and in their concrete shelters, and hiding in the rocks, and hiding in the caves. That's what's found in Isaiah. Hiding in the rocks, hiding in the caves. They will fear the glory of God who is coming through. Abraham. There was a Passover. Now, it doesn't say anything, Pastor, about there being any orbital shift or any axis turn anywhere. And my science didn't tell me that in 9th grade. Really? Okay. The Dead Sea went from a beautiful, fertile plain 1,300 feet below sea level. It dropped 1,300 feet. The Africa plate shifted from the Eurasian plate. 1,300 feet. And you don't think something happened to the axis or to the orbit of the earth just because they don't tell you about it? How come I haven't been told these things? How come we have to get to the end of the age before God explains what it is? The 4th Passover, and I am always astounded, the complex things that God talks about in the simple term of Passover. Moses had a Passover. This is the only one you call a Passover because it's the only one where God teaches what a Passover actually is all about. It's the only one where he teaches. It's the only one. All the rest of them are untaught. All the rest of them you have to figure out for yourself. All the rest of them you have to believe what he said to Moses and apply it to the rest of Scripture. And you have to do that. And to a large degree, we do not do that. It is the one teaching Passover because it is the Passover that has deliverance from bondage, deliverance from sin, deliverance, and it also has judgment. The two qualities of a Passover are deliverance and they are judgment. And God did that because he was getting ready to lay the new foundation of a new civilization that was built on the laws, the statutes, and the ordinances. And he said to Israel, surely you will follow me. Surely you will understand me. Surely you will do what I say. Because you've seen the mighty miracles of God. You've seen the power. And then we come along and we say, wait a minute, I didn't learn any of that stuff. Nothing was taught. You see, there was only one teaching Passover. There was no more. If he's the God of heaven and earth, how many times does he have to tell you something before you get it? Once. So Moses had the only teaching Passover, and what we've done with the Passover, what culture has done with the Passover, what Satan has done with the Passover is quite simple. The Christians have all learned that it's that old Jewish thing. Forget it. It's that old Jewish thing. The Jews have learned that it's our thing because we got delivered, and that's all it is. And nobody takes it seriously, and nobody understands it. Okay, the fifth Passover. Remember what a Passover is. The orbit and the axis of the earth are shifted. Okay, the fifth one is Joshua chapter 10. Because in Joshua chapter 10, the nations of Israel are going to war with 5 kings. And they're ready and they're going after them. And they get into a horrendous battle with them. And they're beating them and they're whacking them. And then the sun starts to go down. It starts to get dark. And these 5 kings who live in this area, know the terrain, are about ready to escape. And they're about ready to get away. So God does something strange. He pours down rocks and fire from heaven. Now, what do we call rocks and fire from heaven? Rocks and fire from heaven pour upon them. We know about rocks and fire from heaven. Called meteors, asteroids, comets. I mean, we know about that kind of stuff. They're sending out missiles now with nuclear warheads to try to stop the comets that they know will be coming in to change this world. Okay? Are y'all up to speed on that? Okay, we're on the same page with that. And so in Joshua, fire and rocks fell from heaven. Then God said to Moses, he said, raise your arms. So Moses raised his arms. And when he raised his arms, the sun stood still and stopped moving. So these enemies, these 5 kings, could not get away. The sun stood still as long as he had his arms up. He got really tired. So they took and they sat him on a rock. And 2 guys held his arms up, and they were his armor bearers. They were the ones who really carried the fight. You won't believe how pastors need men just to hold their arms up.
Amen.
And all hell is breaking loose.
Yes.
You won't believe how much they need that. And so Joshua sat on that stone, and the sun stood still in the heavens for 24 hours while they scoured and killed all these guys. Now, I want to ask you a question. Raise your hands. How many of you have heard of this, read of it, or studied it in Sunday school?
Everybody.
I'm astounded. Half of you have never heard of it? It's Joshua chapter 10. It's your homework. Because I studied it when I was in 4th grade. And I asked the teacher, what happened? I don't know, the sun stood still in the heavens. Okay? Well, my question is like this. If you have an earth here, if you have a sun here, and the sun and the earth stand still, what has to happen? Something bigger than the sun and the earth has to move in and hold them in place. I've heard that engineers say that they can find, looking at the atomic clock of the earth, that there is one 24-hour time period missing. Is this it?
Yes.
Some Christians say it is.
Amen.
I'm just telling you that if you believe your Bible, you believe Joshua 10 too. And if you believe Joshua 10, then you will say that the sun stood still in the heavens for 24 hours. In my doctoral thesis, I studied the Mayan Indians. And when I studied the Mayan Indians, they have a very bloodthirsty religion. They fought all the time, and they didn't fight to kill, they fought to capture, so they could take people up on the tops of their pyramids, cut out their heart, and they could take this beating heart and this bleeding body and push it down these steep stone steps, and they had just a river of blood, river of blood, river of blood. Why did they do this? They did this because they wanted the sun to stay still. Now, why did they want the sun to stay still if the sun had never been unstill? That to me seemed like one of the dumbest things in the world. Why in the world would you design a religion to make the sun stand still if the sun had never not stood still? Okay? So, have any of you ever heard that Pharaoh was a god in Egypt?
Yes.
Has anybody heard that? Ten Commandments, that kind of stuff. You know why the Pharaonic religion made Pharaoh a king? I found it in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Because in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they've got this psalm that says that Pharaoh will do it in order to stabilize the sun so we will not have 10 plagues come upon land, that we will not have the destruction that came at the time of Noah. The Pharaonic religion was designed in order to protect from the Passover of Noah. So there you've got one culture. Here you've got the Mayan culture, and it's because the sun stood still in the heavens. You have to decide, either it did or it didn't. I've got no decision because I read the Bible. Okay. Number 6, Passover. And this is Isaiah, deliverance. Now, I'm going to ask another. King Hezekiah was sick. There was an enemy army all around the city going to destroy him. And the prophet Isaiah gets too highfalutin for what he really is. And he comes to him and he says, "You're going to die." And then he goes back to God and God says, "No, you ain't. No, he is not. He's not going to die. You go tell him he won't die." So he goes back to King Hezekiah, and Hezekiah, meanwhile, he's been a pretty decent king. He looked at the wall and he said, "God, I've been a good king. I've been a good guy. Please, please, give me more time. Let me straighten this mess out. Please, God, don't take me away now. I want to live. I want to live. I want to live." And then Isaiah walks in and says, "You know, I told you you're going to die. You're not going to die." And he says, "What kind of sign do you want? Do you want the sun to move forward 10 degrees or the sun to move backwards 10 degrees? And Hezekiah looks at it and says, "Well, that's kind of silly, because everybody knows if you just wait, the sun's going to move forward 10 degrees. He says, "I want to see it go backward 10 degrees. So it says that the sun went backwards 10 degrees. Then if you read in this same chapter, and you have to combine it with the chapter before, when you look at this same chapter, what happens is 185,000 of the enemy army die outside the city walls of Jerusalem because of what happened when the sun went backwards in the heavens. Now, my point is that I believe and I define as a Passover. The sun goes the way it is now. Okay? That, how many of you have heard of that? The sun going backwards in the time of Hezekiah? Well, we're getting better. At least half of us have heard of it. Isaiah 38 and 39. That's your other homework until we get on. Okay. The 7th Passover. There's a man who's hanging on the cross for 3 hours. And then this man dies. He's put on the cross at the time of the morning sacrifice. He dies at the time of the evening sacrifice. His name is Yeshua HaMashiach. Now, I want to describe him to you. Listen to this description. They beat him with a whip until his back was so bloody that he stood in a puddle of blood. The rocks were rent. The mountains were torn with the earthquakes. He had great thirst, like on Egypt, when the water had turned to blood and they worshipped the frog god Heket. That meant thirst. And you took him and you beat him so badly that the skin from his neck to his knees was gone. And can you imagine putting him in a garbage dump so he couldn't move? With all that skin gone, his body became a living carpet of flies. Flies completely covered his body, laying their eggs, biting, eating, doing what they do. And as he was there, his eyes and his nose were covered with gnats, going in there, sucking, taking the liquid, taking the moisture, pulling it away, taking the tears, taking the... You got the picture?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
gnats.
So thank you.
That's gnats. For the first time, he was stripped of skin from the neck to the knees. He looked like the red heifer of Israel. And because of that, he had the disease, the mold, the mildew, the fungus, the bacteria, and the viruses. They all attacked him. Swoop! Because everybody he'd ever healed, he took their curse, their sickness upon himself. And so all the diseases were there. There was a storm and rain, and everything poured out. Darn, I'm not going to finish. And the death of the firstborn, and the resurrection of people walking around. Okay? Okay, I'll give you one more very quick, and then I'm going to skip my conclusion. I'll pick it up next week. Okay? Have you all gotten the picture that the first crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the seventh Passover? Okay? And then the book of Revelation reveals where the 10 lost tribes are, has 5 months of 30 days in order to reconcile itself, and you wind up with the earth reformed, a perfect habitation for man. He does all of that. Okay, I want to turn very quickly to the second page of this handout. I'm going to show you a very unusual, and I'll try to do this very quickly. I'm going to give you the eightfold feast of Israel. First is Passover, Adam. Second is Feast of Unleavened Bread, Noah. Third is First Fruits, the rapture of Abraham. Fourth, Pentecost, that is the early harvest of Moses. Yom Teruah, Joshua, blowing the trumpet. Shabbat, Isaiah, because Isaiah looks backwards and forward. He's called the fifth gospel because he says so much about the prophecies of Jesus Christ. 7, Yom Kippur. That is Christ first coming to die. And Sukkah, which is Christ's second coming to create his harvest. I draw a perfect parallel between the feasts of Israel and the Passovers that I just described for you. And they mean the same thing in God's economy. And without studying the Old Testament feasts, you have no idea what God is doing. Rise for the Aaronic benediction.